Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to invite our following panelists to RICC, President of ISOC. I think he's joining us online. Then we have Principal ICT Officer, Serign Modou, Mr. Jabbi, Director General of GSC, Dondeh Gillen, President ITAG, and we have Matarr Touray, Senior Economist PURA. Beran is also joining us online. Okay, for this session, we'll be looking at issues of accessibility and cost. I'm a bit sorry, I have a cold, so my voice is not very good today. We're looking at issues of accessibility and cost. I think one of the things, key things we learned from the pandemic is the importance of access to good internet service and also an affordable internet service. Because before the pandemic, we've seen that people didn't took the internet seriously, but not that seriously. But the pandemic forced all of us to go back online. Some of us who were doing our courses have to be online 24/7, and then some of us were working virtually. Literally, we have to sit in front of the computer from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock every day in the morning. So we see the issues of course coming in. So the following speakers will be talking about this, why it is important for us to have good accessible internet also, and also to have reasonable cost. So I will first call on our ladies first, the only lady in the panel, Dondeh, to the president of ITAG. She was also for the thing during 2017 to 2018-19. She was also the chair of this committee. Welcome.
Thank you, Haddija. Before I move forward, I would just like to confirm if everyone can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Beran Dondeh Gillen, and I am the current president of the IT Association of the Gambia. Thank you for having me on this discussion. The IGF has always been something very dear to me, and I remember a couple of years ago when we organized the West Africa IGF, and that was quite something at that time. This topic in particular that we're going to be speaking about, accessibility and cost, is something that has been a recurring theme, so to speak, on a lot of our IGFs in the past couple of years. And not necessarily that is not being addressed by the relevant authorities, public as well as private sector, but mainly because it's something that continues to pose a challenge in the tech sector, and it's something that maybe requires either more commitment, or perhaps maybe in addition to more commitment, more resources on the part of both public and the private sector to be able to address the issue. And I'm happy to see that there's really a huge mix of public and private sector on this panel. So I'm sure it'll be a very interesting discussion going forward. Now, I'm going to be speaking with two hats today. And anyone who knows me knows I wear a lot of hats. In addition to being the president of ITAG, I also consult a lot for, I consult for the International Trade Center. And one of the things that the International Trade Center is currently looking at working on is connectivity, and possibly how to make connectivity better. And it's interesting that Fatu mentioned in her closing remarks the challenges that some of her followers receive or have when it comes to connectivity and cost. It's also interesting to note that both the first sub-theme and this sub-theme are quite interrelated and interconnected. With regards to accessibility, I think that one I will leave to our MOICI rep and our PURA rep. They're probably the GSC as well, because a lot of the challenges we have with regards to accessibility is to do with the last mile connection. But also with regards to accessibility, what I would want to speak about today, not infrastructure, but mainly focusing on working with the private sector to see how best to make accessibility less of a challenge when it comes to connectivity. And what I mean by that is when you look at some of the challenges that really we have with accessibility, We're talking about the last mile. We're talking about we have EcoWAN, we have fiber, we have all these other connectivity mechanisms. How do we get it to the people? And what I want to suggest, or what I want to put out there for discussion for both our panelists as well as the people that are sitting in the audience, is how about engaging those that do this for a living in the private sector? Engage them and see how best to make accessibility less of a challenge. How do you do that? What I see popping up a lot lately in Gambia, which I find quite interesting and I encourage, and that is, I see Comium is doing it, and I also see 2 or 3 other smaller players that have also jumped on the bandwagon, and that is mobile hotspots. Mobile hotspots, these are hotspots that are put in densely populated areas, and it allows your usual day-to-day person that doesn't necessarily have the financial might to buy, I don't know, $870 is worth of 8 gig data from Africell, for example, or the equivalent from QCell. They are not able to have that. And what they can do is pay something as small as a $20 or $25 token and be able to access the internet for a day. So these are some of the things that I see happening out there, and I find it quite interesting. And I think that this could be something that could be leveraged on by the public sector specifically, or even the private sector coming together and seeing how best to scale this on a bigger scale so that you will have more access. So for me, accessibility in my personal opinion, not speaking as ITAG or ITC rep, but as Beran, the user, the internet user, in my personal opinion, I think there has to be a hybrid of the public and private sector coming together for accessibility to be less of a challenge, for that your everyday user to be able to get online and do the things that they need to do. And I'll give you an example. You see a lot of young entrepreneurs that are coming up now that are coming up with great ideas, that have their companies are running and they're doing quite well. What is the continuous and consistent challenge? Connectivity, accessibility, and the cost of it. Because you have to now worry about running your business online on an online marketplace, which requires you to be online all the time to monitor your sales, which requires you to be able to deliver to your customers, which requires you to be online again. So you would realize that a lot of these businesses are suffering as a result of not being able to have affordable access to the internet. And as a result, this directly affects innovation. It directly affects our GDP. So for me personally, you cannot have an impact on accessibility without bringing forces of both public and private sector together. Bring together the people that make these laws and regulations and policy together with the people who do this for a living. And I believe with that, you would really see an impact across the tech sector when it comes to accessibility. And as a result, that would directly, obviously, impact cost. Because once you have that public-private partnership between the public and the private sector, infrastructure costs will be subsidized by either the public sector or donor partners that are interested in this sector. And by extension, this would directly affect the internet cost for the day-to-day user. So something that is costing you $25 is now to connect to a Comium hotspot, for example, on the Senegambia highway when you pass by, could easily cost as little as $15 if it is done in the right way. So for me, that would be one of the things that I would really want both the ministry as well as organizations like ITAG, like the GCCI, like the Gambia Youth Chamber and the Women Chamber to focus on, to really be able to support our business entrepreneurs to take their businesses to the next level. I would stop there and let the other panelists maybe have some introductory remarks, and then maybe we can get into the discussion proper. Thank you, and over.
He's the president of ISO. He's also joining us online. You must really look at the technical angles of the things, especially when it comes to issues of access. Okay, while we wait for Alaji, we can just move on quickly to Serign from the Ministry of Principal ICT Officer from MOICI. Already, Beran highlighted a lot of issues when it comes to the accessibility and cost. But I think the ministry also is working on some policy issues on how to address these, especially looking at the business angle. Maybe you can take us through what are the what are some of the policies the ministry has in place right now, and how can we deal with the issues of accessibility and cost. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Khadija, for bringing that discussion, and thank you also, distinguished delegates, for joining us both online and offline. As you all might be aware that as a vision of our ministry is a Gambia with requisite infrastructure and enabling policy regulatory framework to ensure everyone's connectivity to ICT services. Along those visions, I believe our mandate as a ministry is to build the foundation and to build the base. As Marxist theory have it, that the base is done with the superstructure. So in building that base, it is more of the regulatory frameworks, enabling environment, the policy aspect of it. We have achieved a lot in that dimension, and also in the formation process of the superstructure when it comes to the strategies we put in place, when it comes to the action plans, blended with those strategies, and when it comes to the financial mechanisms to achieve those strategic or those strategies we have in place. So all what we want as a ministry is at least to have a superstructure that is affordable in terms of internet connectivity and access, and also a superstructure that is innovative in terms of creating the right services, the right products that are needed within the ecosystem, and also a base also that is sustainable. So in doing that, recently, most of you might be aware that we have formulated a national broadband policy and strategy, which is the first we have in the Gambia. And in that broadband policy and strategy, all the issues with regards to accessibility, both in urban, peri-urban, and rural areas, have been definitely well addressed. And also the issue of affordability when it comes to access, issue of also cost related issues, how to bring it down was also access in that strategy. You also might be aware that we have the ICT for development policy, it was mentioned by the director, in which we have many strategic pillars dealing with the elements of the ecosystem that if they are in place, definitely in terms of access, everyone will be included. And those strategies include the E aspect of it, which is e-education, e-health, e-commerce, e-government, and so. And also when it comes to the development of infrastructure, in terms of broadband, in terms of ICT infrastructure. That policy also addresses that quite well. So also when it comes to the demand side of it, because we realize that we have the needed infrastructure in place when it comes to the first mile or international mile by bringing the land station in the Gambia. And 3 years we were having only, I could say, 6 SPM1s activated. Then during its implementation, it leaped from 6 to 62. Then after from there to 660 SPM1s, which equivalent to 930,000 megabits per second of available capacity. And also, when it comes to the core network, you realize that the ministry, as a result of our policies, we were able to have what we call the F1 network. We have also the Dondeh legacy fiber, when it combined with the F1 network, give a coverage of at least 940 kilometers of internet around the country. And recently, when combined with the national broadband network that was to launch, most covering most of the greater Banjul area. And in that is more of the solution of FTTX, which is fiber to the X, fiber to the businesses, fiber to the premises, fiber to home, fiber to everywhere. So in that, we also have seen when it comes to cost that what we have achieved is in terms of corporate customers before the MBA, we were having maybe 10 net costing the corporate customer $80,000. But after having it in place, it reduced down to $8,000. There is a significant reduction in terms of cost. But also when it comes to access, before coming back to cost, we realize that what constitutes access in terms of different dimensions is a lot. It includes policy aspect of it from government side. It also includes the demand side when it comes to digital literacy from every angle that can be enabled by digital transformation, local content, digital entrepreneurship systems and applications that are available, particularly digital transformation and digital literacy. The most important part of it is digital literacy. We realize that, or did have it that if there is a significant gain in digital literacy, then there will be what we call the digital skills available, the digital mindset, the digital skills, the digital culture embedded in people. And once you have the digital culture embedded in people, there will be the digital leadership to track or to drive digital transformation in society. So for that being the case, that is also another aspect of it. If you have digital transformation within societies, you will realize that definitely whenever you have a system, whenever you have internet, maybe build it in rural area, people will tend to use it because they know what it can do for them in terms of transforming their life, in terms of socio-economic development, in terms of digital, in terms of societal transformation or development. The other aspect of it is the invisible spectrum, the invisible mile, we call it, which is more of the spectrum aspect of it. What are the available spectrum resources within the country to enable the facilitation of access to those areas that are underserved or unserved? I think PURA are doing a lot when it comes to that, and it's management also. So the other thing is the technology mix. What type of technologies are more affordable in reaching out to those who are not having that right access? What are the bandwidth requirements or the bandwidth needs in terms of connectivity that they need? The other aspect is more of the infrastructure sharing. Infrastructure sharing whereby you know that the total cost of ownership is definitely affecting one way or the other access and cost. So how can you reduce the total cost of ownership when it comes to capital expenditure and operational expenditure? When we share infrastructure, passively or actively, or in terms of civil infrastructure, we can definitely gain in terms of bringing access to areas that are not reachable in terms of lesser financial needs in doing that. In areas particularly that are not economically viable. The other thing is the private sector and public sector, private sector and government participation when it comes to facilitating, particularly the middle and the last mile to those areas. They are also very important. And the other thing which I consider very important, particularly when it comes to access, is the effective and efficient business model that we have. Because most of the time you realize that in Gambia, many will tell you that we have access, we have internet everywhere. But why people are not getting it? Because we don't have close, effective business model in place to ensure that it is affordable and it is accessible to where it's supposed to be. When it comes to cost, particularly, it's more of there are different dimensions of it. One is more of the government intervention, one is the private sector intervention, regulatory intervention, business model, and so. For government intervention, what can be done to reduce cost is more of taxation, subsidization, incentive, and effective regulation. And the other aspect of the private sector is looking at the broad base of it. If I reduce the costs, how many customers will come in play? So that is important, and also innovation in product and services. For example, what level of micro network, what level of my access network can I automate in terms of network orchestration or automation? Community networks, crowdfunding to build networks within areas that are not economically viable are also an option. The rest is more of the last resort, which is consumer protection issues and serious of intervention. For example, when things are not going right, if you believe that there is not the transparency in terms of the data, whether operators are giving it right or operators, some will say they are cheating us, there is not that transparency. That's where the consumer protection body will come. That's where the CSO's intervention will come from. So maybe as an overview, thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Serign, for that elaborate breakdown of the issues when it comes to issue of accessibility and cost. And I see that we are moving, the last week has not come on and seen a lot of hands online. But before we take the commentators, we will just go to PURA. So I know when it comes to issues of accessibility and cost, people have a lot of questions for PURA. So one of the discussions you see online a lot is the cost of internet in Gambia. So people do feel that they are being cheated by their service providers. And generally, when you look at the figures, I think Gambia is one of the countries with the highest cost of internet. When it comes to one GB of data, you pay around $250. And then I think a recent figure that came out on the World Bank is when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, including Gambia, we pay the highest cost of internet. And most of the low income earners tend to spend all of their salary on internet costs. And Ghana is part of this country. So as a regulatory body, what are you doing in collaboration with the university so that the cost of internet goes down? So the other issue also I want you to discuss, Mr. Touray, is when it comes to accessibility, the other things also we talk about is the fairness, the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And then you can see that when you're going to the provinces, the more remote you go, you can even see when you reach yes, after Beran, the internet drops from 4G light to 3G, and sometimes the farther you go in, you only have E, you don't even have a G. So and this is one of the issues when we talk about digital rights, rights on the internet, bridging the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots. These are issues that are supposed to be addressed. So as a regulator, but what is really to address some of these issues? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and thank you to my fellow panelists for their interventions. I think some of them have touched on some of the issues I had actually jotted down, but it's fine. In terms of your initial question as it relates to sub-Saharan Africa and how it performs in relation to internet affordability and internet cost, I think it is evident that there are significant structural defects within sub-Saharan Africa as it relates to internet connectivity, and of course, that naturally affects the entire value chain. Um, Taking the context of West Africa, for example, you take the lower performing countries, which are Gambia, maybe Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, Sierra Leone. These countries really were connected to the global internet infrastructure in 2012. Now, what you have is you have first mover advantage, which is why Gambia at some point was connected by Senegal. Now, what does that do for Senegal? It creates additional economies of scale for them because you now have a full country connected by your entire internet backbone. That reduces your unit cost. So always, I'm very careful when I see comparisons between countries without looking at the underlying structure of what is happening in these markets. Now, bringing it back to the Gambia itself in particular, I think it is established that in relation to affordability, we are performing quite poorly on almost all indices. When you look at the various matrices that we use at PURA to compare us to various countries, you look at mobile broadband, the cost of a 1 GB connection equates to give or take around $5. To go to fixed broadband as well, if you want maybe a standard 1 meg connection or 2 meg connection, you probably have to pay $2,500 per month on ISP. That is about $50 per month. Now, of course, this has to be juxtaposed against really and truly what the income levels are. On mobile broadband, which really, I think most Gambians that are connected to the internet, the first point of connection is via mobile broadband. Um, when you really compare it, it's about 9% of GNI per capita, just for one gig connection. The global reference or the global benchmark is about 2%. Now, going back to the countries that I had earlier mentioned, they are all operating within that particular space. So, I mean, you sort of have improvements, but you also start realizing that there's so much more that can be done. I think initially when this came online, a 1 meg connection was around $10,000. We are $2,500. That's about a 75% reduction. But of course, still, it has to go down because people really cannot afford it. How does it go down? It's sort of a multifaceted approach towards it going down. I think COVID really exposed some of the issues that we face as a country with regards to affordability. I think you had a lot of packages that were offered at the operator level in terms of how best do you integrate additional bandwidth for some institutions. You have the academic institutions as well that were really requesting for consideration because their students really had to transition on that. Now, in an optimal market, we really didn't have to get to that stage. But because of where we are and some of the defects that are within the context of our market, and this is not really unique to Gambia, these defects really exacerbated the issue of cost and affordability. But at the end of the day, I mean, when you look at, I always talk about it from a mutualization perspective. When you look at a particular household, a household of maybe 5 to 8 people, and how much each individual spends on mobile data in itself, and then you compare it to every two. If that household was to subscribe to a fixed internet package, you now see how many the cost savings that they could have made in terms of mutualization in that context. But I think we also now have to go back to the issue of stakeholder marketing. Uh, Unfortunately, you have me as PURA here. I should have been written as independent so that I can really get into the specifics of the issues as it relates to the different stakeholders within the sector. But I'll start with the stakeholder marketing itself. I'll start from government itself. I think government has been the greatest enabler of ICT development in this country. We have a very strong private sector, but I think government has done more strides towards ensuring internet access. But by the same token, government has also been the greatest inhibitor towards internet development in this country as well. Now, I say that it sounds controversial, but I say that in the context of we have, on one hand, we want to increase internet access. At this stage, if you look at internet access, we're looking at 3G and 4G broadband connections. When you go by IT definitions, GPRS is no longer really considered a standard broadband. So we're looking at 3G and 4G, which combined is just about just over 1 million. So give or take, we have a 50% penetration rate in terms of internet access. But what you want is you want what is happening with voice. With voice, almost every Gambian adult you go to now at least has access to a mobile phone or has a SIM card, which has resulted in very high penetration rates. And we actually, that is the one thing is that when you look at any sort of benchmark, Gambia really is way up there with the likes of the Qatars and the UAEs because of the penetration and the size of the country also makes it possible. But when we come back to affordability, government has done well. You've invested $25 million in ACE. You've created an open access framework for it. You've now invested another $25 million in ECO1 to create a fiber infrastructure. And Gambia is the only country where in Africa where every single individual lives within 25 kilometers of a fiber node. Now, a lot of the times we take this for granted, but once it's presented in external fora, you realize how much government has done. But by the same token, it's also the same government that now comes again and says, I'm going to tax you on usage. Because some of the taxes we really have as an ICT sector, we've constantly made a point in tandem with MOICI. I think I'm glad MOICI is here because we've constantly made the point to our principals with regards to the taxation regime and how unfavorable it is for accessibility and affordability of ICT services. I give a case in point. We've embedded the issue of a sports levy in the ICT sector. And really and truly, there's no direct correlation between sports and ICT. Now, what that has caused is we now have these are consumer taxes. No operator would ever onboard a tax for to say that okay, you can take it out of my profit. They would always push that burden back onto the consumers. And as part of our role, it's both regulatory and advocacy. And the advocacy role, we've really made it clear that some of these issues really have to be taken out from the sector. Then you have the issue of excise taxes. Globally, the best practice for excise taxes is you want to tax something that really induces harm. I think from the presentations we've had the entire day, we've realized that if anything, the ICT sector is a critical enabler for growth. The Honorable Minister, in his opening statements, made mention of a World Bank study that a 10% increase in broadband penetration results in a 1.4% increase in GDP growth per capita. He did actually go further that that study, when it's contextualized to Africa, actually results in a 3.4% growth in GDP per capita. The initial reference was just for developing countries. So these are all things. But how do you increase broadband penetration when the actual means of people accessing broadband, you're also taxing it outside of their pay pockets? Then you also have the other stakeholder, which is us at PURA, in terms of how do we create an enabling regulatory framework? Because we're sort of, I always say, we're sort of caught between two competing sort of interests. Of course, the consumers want lower costs, better quality of service. Operators are, of course, going after profit. It's always, it's always a delicate balancing act in terms of how do you address that issue. But I also say, in terms of operators, I think there's so much more that can be done to optimize how really they're really providing their services to consumers. I have seen one or two around, but it seems that they have left. But I think definitely their end of the bargain, they're not really also holding up to it as much as they should. From a quality of service perspective, of course, some of the issues that have been raised, it has improved. It could be better. On speed indices, we really are still doing a bit poorly because I think when you look at UCLA, which does speed test indexes, really Gambia across, I think we're in the bottom percentile of countries in terms of speed. So there's so much that can be done. But also these issues are exacerbated by the issue of all the GPRS connections on our network. And as you said, as you go further inland, you start to realize that the quality of the connection really is not really the same. But fundamentally, we really now have to go back to the drawing board and see how do we optimize all these structures. I think one issue, maybe as a key takeaway, and probably for all the participants here, is a fundamental understanding of PURA's role as it relates to actually regulating prices. Price regulation is very complex, especially in a very dynamic sector. And I think at the time of drafting the IC Act, this is something that the drafters realized. They took, at the time, best practice approaches towards price regulation. And in a market with four mobile operators, um, it behooves common sense to include price regulation, and the Act specifically forbids price regulation in competitive markets. So that is why sometimes you do see the criticism of PURA that, well, internet prices are expensive, but PURA refuses to bring it down. But really, we do not have a legal basis to go to an operator and tell them, no, this has to be your price. Now, what we can do is we can identify certain market segments within the broadband value chain which we can really make targeted interventions, hoping that this would eventually reduce end user prices. And this is what we did in 2014, sorry, no, 2017 to 2018, where we ended up looking at international connectivity, ACE, and national broadband connectivity, that is the ECO1, where we made targeted interventions in these markets. Because what happened is these are wholesale markets that really are not subject to multiplication. Because the issues we faced, if ACE was easily replicated, we would have had a second ACE, and the outages that we had in prior years, we wouldn't have had. But so we made targeted interventions, and prices definitely in this context for both ACE and ECO1 had significantly reduced, and the open access framework for it was created. Now, one of the visible effects of this is it has also enabled indigenous Gambian participation, especially in the ICT market. Now, when you look at some of the recent ISPs that have come online, these are purely Gambian, 100% owned, and definitely it is something we have to be proud of. And some of them that have just been in the sector for about 2 or 3 years are actually now market leaders within the ISP market space. They definitely have quite a large share of subscribers, and are also pushing the boundaries in terms of accessibility across the context. But as always, when we talk about the internet, we always have to look at that broadband value chain. Now, coming back to mobile data, I think one thing we also have to realize is in 2009 we had four operators. In 2020, 2021, we still have those same four operators. But what has happened is you have seen that the dynamics of the market have really shifted considerably. Um, Anytime operators are mentioned, I'll give a case in point for myself actually. About 3 weeks back, my laptop bag was stolen, and my neighbor's cell phones were also stolen. But what had happened is when we engaged the police in terms of helping to track the IMEIs, we asked them, well, we can try to get all four operators. They said, bro, don't worry. We need the officer like you said, right? They come intelligent. Well, what has happened is we're seeing shifting dynamics in the market where from four operators we're looking at a duopoly. Now, what happens with a duopoly is these two start moving in very similar terms with very limited price competition between them. And the fundamental premise of the ICA Act is how do you induce competition towards reducing end user prices. Now, there we can make targeted interventions, which we have started looking at investigating the nature of the duopoly and seeing to what appreciable extent are these two operators moving outside of the market, and are they starting to sort of have duopoly power where they can really price as per. Because really and truly, as it stands, if I sit here and say, well, PURA can go there tomorrow and say reduce your prices, really and truly, if I go to court tomorrow, I have no basis to stand on. So, but with the current IC Act review that is ongoing, these are the current issues that we probably would try to address within the context of the Act. But also fundamentally, competition is always the best determinant of prices as compared to regulatory bodies setting prices. So that is why best practice always averts against that. But should you start seeing instances of market failure, you really have to address it within that context. Now, finally, I think we're talking about internet governance framework, but well, now in the context of global nomenclature, we're looking at the internet as really the global, the digital economy, which really embeds so many other issues. And I think in the context of the Gambia, yes, usage has gone up, but also fundamentally, I think we're still, if the internet is the 100%, we're still not using 5% of the internet. Every so often we do surveys of internet usage and also quality of experience. But you realize, I always say it in every forum, sometimes you ask people the first question, do you use the internet? The first answer is no. Then the next question is, do you use WhatsApp or are you on Facebook? And the second answer is yes. So fundamentally, we still have pockets that, as Serign said, the issue of digital literacy must really be put out there so that we can also, because it's such a vast ecosystem of things that you can really do for us to be only utilizing it as much as we are in the Gambia. I also was quite excited when Beran said the issue of hotspots because in as much as you cannot price regulate, you can also induce competition in various markets, which would really, you hope, would have a ripple effect on other issues within the context of the sector. So we have licensed quite a number of hotspots. Hopefully by the end of the year, they will deploy. And the thing with the deployment of hotspots is they're quite nimble as to targeting the areas. Some of the existing ISPs, because by virtue of their licenses, are allowed to deploy hotspots, which they have started. Then you also have the issue of licensing. I think it was sometime last year or 2 years back. We also had the issue of one of the major global operators really wanting to have a presence in the Gambia in the fixed ISP segment. It created a lot of brouhaha and a lot of back and forth. Gambians were still, I think we still have an apprehension towards foreign ownership, which I think it's good in terms of technological transfer and building the capacity of people. But I remember at the time when Orange wanted to enter the Gambian market as well. I mean, these are things that really sell a good profile of the country. And when you look at the commercial proposals as per their licenses, you realize that discernible impact could have been made. unfortunately is still a bit in limbo. But these are some of the issues because, in closing, I think what we fundamentally have and what has come into the context of the discussion is Gambia is a third world country, of course, first world problems of I want reliable internet, I want affordable internet, and I want it now. Now, the broader architecture of it, of the country as well, has to be taken into account. One, we are a small country with limited economies of scale. That is why when you look at electricity, we're looking at mutualization in terms of interconnecting. Of course, that reduces the unit cost. You also have the issues of electricity, which goes back to your question on the digital divide. Because what you do have is you have certain sites of operators, really and truly, they are operating virtually 100% on generators. Now, as expensive as NAREC is, try to run your entire household on a diesel generator. Then you would realize, okay, this is probably NAREC is 3 times cheaper than this. So all of this within the context of the broader ecosystem of the Gambia, with a limited population size, and all of these things have to be considered. So in closing, yes, internet prices would come down, but also we have to temper our expectations. I don't want to sit here and say, well, they will get to a point where we will pay $5 for a gigabyte of data. But we really have to understand the entire dynamics of the environment we are under and what we operate on. I think I will close on that for now and then take more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Touray. That was very good. But we really don't want to tamper our expectations. We want us to come down right away. I noticed that when we are speaking, one of the mistakes we made was that we should have Minister of Finance on this panel because the issues of taxation comes in. And they are the only ones who can answer that question. But we hope to see them in the next sessions. And maybe those questions can be thrown back to them to see how do we work on those issues. And since we are talking about accessibility and cost, we have Mr. Jabbi. He's online now. He's the Director General of the Gambia Submarine Cable. And one of the things we've been talking about is the penetration having another submarine cable. And then I think another thing also we want to throw on your table is, Mr. Jabbi, is the issues of we cannot talk about accessibility without talking about the internet shutdowns. And I think what this year, some of the things we've seen, I think 4, 5 counting, we went for 6, 7 hours without any internet. Maybe you can explain what can be done to about these things because one of the beyond the other starting from the business and one of the things they talk about is the effect these shutdowns have on businesses and the loss cannot be calculated. So maybe Mr. David, we can talk about all those issues. Okay, we will take questions now. If Mr. Jabbi comes back online, then he can give his presentation quickly. So if you have any questions, you can take from online to from online, and then we can take two from offline. And I've already seen some hands up.
Okay, I better use this one. Good afternoon again. I'm Haddija from National Human Rights Commission. Thank you very much for the presentations, and I think my question would go to whether PURA or, and I also wish the Minister of Finance is present here. Considering the cost of internet, there's access to internet, even in telephony. Having worked in telecoms for almost 20 years, and in fact responsible for some of the implementation of taxes sent to the GMs of telecoms operators, I do not see any reason why we are doing that. Okay, my question is, how do we expect the internet, the access to internet on the telephony to go down when we are increasing the cost of calling with excess taxes? The last time I remember, 22.25% tax is charged for telephony access, including 2.25 for GRTS, which the telephone users are paying, including 40 bottles per minute call for sports levy. All those put together, when I calculated the 40 bottles per minute internet access call, went almost about 28 to 30%. For every $100 is I bought for mobile credit, 30% of that is going for tax. How do we expect the cost to go down? The second question is, having have our bandwidth increase of that level, internet access is supposedly there at this time, but then people cannot pay for it. What is the essence of the increment in the bandwidth, the expenses of a $25 million granted project and other projects when people cannot use because they don't have the means to pay what is charged for it? So are we doing as a country to bring down the cost for access? Majority of the country, people in the country have the earning powers are low. If the expenses are higher, how do we expect people to be able to use it and make best use of it? That was my question. Thank
you. Any other questions, online or offline? I guess people are hungry now, so I want Serign, Modou, and Mr. Touray to answer those questions.
Beran has a question.
Okay, we have a question from Beran. Beran, you can come in.
Thank you, Haddija. Maybe my question is, I think, for the ministry. Serign Modou made a few comments with regards to accessibility and what the ministry is currently doing. What I would want to put to the ministry, I don't know if he's still around, would be to know specifically. In my introductory remarks, I did mention that my concern has been that I think there has to be some level of collaboration between the public and the private sector for accessibility and cost to go down. And to this end, I think there has to be more engagement from the level of the ministry with regards to the private sector, whether it is the ITAG or the ISPs or whatever means that they have at their disposal through PURA, even if that's a possibility, to see how best to really engage the people who do this for a living. MOICI's mandate, most of it is with regards to policy development, the policy development process, the PDP. So with regards to really implementation, I think they need to, in my opinion, make more of a concerted effort to engage the private sector that are in this business, that know what the challenges are, that know what the technical requirements are, to really be able to make this easily, to tackle this challenge more easily. So my question to MOICI is, what is MOICI doing at this juncture, at this point in time, to engage the private sector, whose field it is, to actually work to manage, maybe to a certain extent, be able to manage cost? How are you engaging them to ensure that, one, accessibility is no longer a challenge or is reduced significantly, and two, that the challenge of cost is being mitigated? Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Beran. Any other questions? Yes, you can come over.
Good afternoon. My name is Serign. I'm from the National Youth Council. Basically, my question will be directed to the Ministry of Information, that is MOICI, and also PURA also. As an entity representing the young people, considering the unemployment rate of the Gambia, whether let's say the regulatory bodies usually consider the young people, considering that in terms of in terms of accessibility, and then looking at the unemployment rate, and then looking at the topic which is legal inclusion, meaning like the quality of service is not important as far as youth are concerned, and considering to the perspective of the unemployment rate of the Gambia. According to African Union, the youth is from 15 up to 35, and considering there is this amount of let's say income earning, and then This services is for the users because provide simple low cost for those who are socially and economically excluded to get online. Because according to my lecturer, Mr. Amulu said here, 430,000 people who are on the social media, considering how many young people are there, and also if the cost is not reduced, will young people be part of the inclusion or what? My question generally is whether all the regulatory bodies do they consider the young people in terms of their earnings and also the.
Thank you. Any other questions? I've seen a hand online. I don't know whether it was on the previous session or not. Okay, I will hand it over quickly to Serign Modou. You can answer the question, then make up your wrap-up comment. Then Mr. Touray, then we'll just go to Beran online quickly to wrap up, and then we'll end this session. Serign Modou.
Okay. I'll start with the last question, which is more of in terms of accessibility and employability or employment of youth. What is my ministry doing in ensuring their employment and also this factoring or increasing their flow of wages when it comes to accessibility and access to internet and its usage. So I will tell you, since the establishment of the ministry in 2002, I think we have done a lot when it comes to employment. As you might be aware that we have an ICT scheme, ICT care kind of within most ministries, whereby most of those ICT technicians or officers placed there were employed by the government of the Gambia. And I can tell you more than 99% of those people employed are youths. And recently also, considering the rate of unemployment, which we believe we have a part to play, we formulated a strategy not long ago that is geared towards empowering youths and women in the ICT sector. And in that strategy, we also carve out realistic financial mechanisms or funding mechanisms, at least to implement the strategies to its fullest. And hopefully, very soon, the strategy can be implemented. And also, you might be aware that we have what we call information centers in many different regions of the country. And in those centers, most of the people employed there are youths. And those youths employed are paid at least, and you will at least expect that income in terms of salaries received or in terms of payment received will add in one way or the other in increasing their power, which is when it comes to accessibility and when it comes to access to internet. And even recently, I can tell you the project, the digital addressing solution project under our initiative of addressing the Gambia. We have employed at least more than 50 youths who have been given, all of them are Gambian, given that opportunity in doing that exercise, and they are paid reasonably good, and that is in one way or the other contributing in their power of purchase when it comes to accessing the internet. And in terms of plans, we are working honestly on this to establish ICT tech hubs, incubation centers. And the ultimate or the bigger plan is to have it roll out in every region, followed by also having science parks established in all regions, where the youthful population of the country would be the ones employed there, and this being trained to the highest level to be developing systems and applications and services, e-services were needed to address most of our developmental challenges now and in the future. So I think, although I believe that is not enough, and the sector, when it comes to its liberalization, you know that before was only cartel, but after the liberalization, we have many different ISPs, we have mobile network operators here and there, and most of the people that are employed within those entities are used. But if these plans are implemented, plus what we have already achieved, then I think there is a greater opportunity for youths in terms of employability. And if they are employed, given payments in terms of salaries also, that will increase their level of power purchase, and that will add up to their will add up to affordability issues. So for Beran, the next question is, what are we doing in terms of using multi-stakeholder approach in the ICT ecosystem to bring the cost of internet down? Yes, I think we have done something before, in which a cost study was done to see main issues that were at least making the cost so exorbitant, and at least have at least come up with a mechanism or a model of reducing costs. And the first shot, when we did that before, I think 2 years ago, we were able to reduce costs to 70%. But yes, still, we believe that it is somehow high. And the reason for that is, as I used to say, is we have to understand sometimes that in the infrastructure that we build, enable connectivity and access, those infrastructures were laid or rolled out based on certain type of investment. Be it some of them can be grant, some of them were loans. And you would expect that in every investment, the investor would expect to have a return on investment. And for calculating the return on investment, you realize that it will add up to the cost in one way or the other. And the other ingredients that constitute the overall cost of internet has to do with many of them. And most importantly, deviating from the ministry sides or to the service provider side is the total cost of ownership. The total cost of ownership is more of the capital expenditure plus the operational expenditure plus others. And others are more of the taxation we mentioned here by senior economist Matarr. And you might know that you have many different type of levies, type of tax levied on board the service in terms of internet and also on board the equipment that enable internet connectivity when it comes to handheld devices. So it is important to note there that yes, still we can do something if we sit together as an ecosystem where we have all stakeholders to know definitely these are real issues, and also to look at it at a broad-based level. Not necessarily that I should look on the return on investment, but also look at it that if I reduce the price, at first in the short run, it might look like that I might be losing, but in the long run, for example, if the price of 1 meg or 1 GB is $100, right? If I reduce it to $5, how many other customers can I have? If it is 1 meg is $100, I'll be able to have only 50 customers connected. How about if I reduce to $5, I will have at least more than 500 customers connected. That broad-based thinking, if all stakeholders look at it that perspective or that direction, probably they might compromise at least and agree somewhere to reduce the cost down. And also government intervention in terms of saying that how about if we reduce the tax from a higher percentage to a lower percentage in the next 5 years? What will happen to cost? And I believe if we do that, cost will drastically go down. Government can do that. The sector, particularly the sector we have as the driver of socio-economic growth and development, I think government should consider that, as cited by many of the speakers, that if we have 10% growth in terms of broadband connectivity, there might be a percentage of 2 to 3 in terms of GDP per capita growth. So if they consider that and reduce the cost for the next 5 years, I believe, in terms of taxation, in terms of other levels, it will be important to see, and it will be definitely evident to see the cost of internet go down. And the other important thing is more of also in terms of considering our sector as part of the service sector, or a greater chunk of the revenue generated from the service sector. Why not government dedicate a good percentage of that revenue generated and this consider the development of the internet in areas that are underserved or unserved or not economically viable to develop, and make sure that those areas are developed. Also come with subsidized in terms of cost. If you take that percentage of the revenue generated, as a result, then we subsidize the cost of the internet. If it was on this maybe $100 per megabyte, then I can say $50 per megabyte. That would also greatly help. I think those are the two key questions that are related to me. The other ones I think Matarr, senior economist, can answer, which is more bandwidth increase, but still now we cannot afford it, and that's a complex area. There are economics thinking there that Matarr could bring out, and the other one is more of how do we bring costs down. Thank you.
Thank you, Serign, and thank you, Haddija. I think I just received a text from my boss, Nicholas, that he's hungry. It's almost went time. He didn't want me to report, but I think I will. But thank you. I think Mr. Sisao raised very important, pertinent, but also very difficult questions. On the issue relating to taxes, I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I think there's been approaches from both MOICI and PURA looking at setting up, putting up advisory notes in relation to a lot of the issues. We're also currently working on doing a comprehensive cost of service study, which, as you indicated, some of the issues, by $100 credit, my last calculation, it was almost now up to $3. I think when you were in the sector, it was at 30. So some of these issues really, to just put it to the fore, that these are some of the issues that are driving the cost. Sometimes it's always best that they see it in black and white. So without much ado, I think that with those engagements, hopefully we will be able to see that at the end of the tunnel. In relation to the increase in bandwidth usage, yes, it is increasing, and it is being increased purposely because people are actually using that bandwidth. So now when you look at a metric which we call the average utilization per capita in terms of kilobits per second, Gambia performs very well. So that is why that is where the increase in bandwidth is coming from. But you would also know, as much as we've increased bandwidth, we are also very, very, very far away from theoretically the maximum bandwidth that we have been allocated as a country. I'm glad to see Mr. Jabbi is here. He can get deeper into that. As per our last data we had, of the total theoretical capacity we have at each, we're not even using 30% of it. So that just basically tells you how much further room we have for growth in terms of the sector particularly. But definitely, all that bandwidth that you see here, all the growth is being used by Gambians. So it probably just comes back to the divide that you're talking about. So when you look at the different market segments, the ISP sector is growing considerably. It's growing from a very low base, but it's growing considerably. So now you even have some ISPs offering plans of more than 20 megabits per second for a residential customer. That previously was unheard of. So when these things start happening, start to happen. You have people using Netflix and all these other services locally. As you also develop the payment infrastructure across the country, it of course corresponds. Now, how do you ensure that this is equalized across the country should be the question, and ensure that the quality of service is also sort of more or less made even. So I think that sort of should give an explanation of where the increase in budget is going. I think my friend from the National Youth Council also raised a pertinent question in relation to youth. Maybe I will, I'm not seeing the chair of the IGF, but I think it would also be good in the next panel or one of the panels to also have maybe one of the operators be part of the panelists, because they are also a critical stakeholder within the issue, the discourse on accessibility and cost. But because they are the ones that actually develop tariff plans that maybe we should consider when we look at low use packages, subsidy packages. I remember before even now it had prepaid, you would have the lifeline subsidy ban, which would be looking at really low income people and how do you just ensure that they can put on a light bulb or something. Now with our youth, I don't want them to just look at the internet to see to be something that okay, I'll just go online, open Facebook, close it, maybe message my girlfriend here or do that. No, I want them to use it for research, academia, and so these lifeline packages really wouldn't work for them. We want something that really is sustainable and tangible for them. But also, it has to be looked at within the broader perspective of the digital economy. You cannot just say the digital economy is wide, the internet is just the network element of it. You have the digital skills element of it. You now have digital financial services. Now, how do we ensure that the youth are really part of this sort of system for the benefit of people who have really lived in systems where the digital economy has really worked? You see, most of the broad-based issues are actually being led by youth. Now, when you see most of these tech companies, it's actually the youth. How do we revise our curriculum to ensure that the youth are able to code, open up new employment opportunities for them, or they themselves being creators of work? So it has to be done, maybe even under the leadership of the council, to bring different stakeholders on board to ensure that the youth really see themselves within the context of the digital economy. Thank you very much.
Let me quickly just tell you some of the issues or the issues that we are dealing with or addressing at the GSC as far as access and cost is concerned. First, what is the GSC? Like the representative from PURA mentioned, we are the only provider of submarine cable connectivity in this country. Everything about you and your ICT services is what we give. Without the GSC, without that connectivity, that submarine cable that we are currently enjoying as a country, without that, no voice, no data services would be provided in this country. Remember, in those days, we were using partly satellite. Everything was very expensive. Till 2012, when the ACE was launched and connectivity was provided on ACE. Almost the entire country's traffic would migrate from the use of the satellite. Even the reliance that we were having on the cross connectivity via Senegal, that too, we completely eliminated by making sure that the entire traffic in the country now is actually moved to the ACE cable. So we are the carrier of carriers. I want that question to be very clear to you. Because if you miss that point, you understand some of the explanations I will be giving you. The GSC is the only carrier of all the other carriers in this country, meaning that we are carrying the traffic of the GAMTEL, the GAMCEL, the AfriCell, the TUCell, the Communes, and all the ISPs in this country. But as a consortium, I'm sure you know the membership, which may not be significant for the purposes of this very short briefing. Now, this connectivity we are providing is the physical connectivity and then the bandwidth that you are currently using, because we give it to those entities. We provide the bandwidth to the GAMTELs, the AfriCells, the TUCells, and the like, and then they in turn resell it to you. This is how it is actually happening. But of course, you will realize that GSC as a submarine cable provider and service provider in terms of bandwidth cannot do this thing by itself alone. So how are we operating within or amongst these operators? That arrangement itself is a costly arrangement. I want you to mark that. It would have been different, and then your services, what you are currently paying, could have been, in fact, lesser than what you are paying. But of course, because of the business model, so we just have to follow those business models. These operators have invested heavily, just like the government, into the GSC. Remember, $25 million you put into a network, which you must use within a period of at least 20 years. It started 2012. We are simply saying in the next 10 years, if we don't have another submarine cable connectivity in this country, we will go back to 2009 days. So that's another challenge. So they want to recoup the cost of their investment within these 20 years. 25 million US dollars is just the physical connectivity. This does not include the quarterly operations and maintenance fee that they pay for the services that you are actually enjoying. And remember, how much are they paying? Quarterly is about 300,000 US dollars. Is what we are paying at the GSC just to maintain this link from the Gambia to the outside world. This cable is connected from the Gambia all the way to France, in the sea, on the seabed, and also the same connecting point leads up to South Africa, connecting almost all the countries on the west coast of Africa. This is why we provide and how we provide the service, but at a cost of almost 300,000 US dollars per quarter. If they pay that, that's just the O&M. I remember they have paid the capital investments of the $25 million. You add these $300,000 per quarter. And remember, as the cable is growing, the O&M costs increase. Because if your network is actually having challenges, you go and measure it and you address it. And each time you go and do those things, it attracts charges, and those charges are cost, and that cost is part of the O&M. And then this O&M, who ends up paying is you and I in our houses, in our villages and towns. We all contribute towards this cost. Because these operators also who buy from the GSC or who get it from the GSC, they wouldn't just give it to you at that price. That's why I simply say the business model is one key issue. Now, another thing, remember we are carrier of these carriers. When this cable connectivity is provided, when we bring the traffic all the way to the GSC, what do? We have a backhauling service at the GSC where all the operators are connected. You have all of them. It's a special room where we have the physical connection comes, stop at our transmission point, at our switching points rather, and then from there they pick this particular traffic. Each of them is connected to inside the Gambia. Then they provide the service. That is the backhauling service I'm talking about. But this backhauling can only be very effective if they further get connected amongst themselves and provide the services accordingly, which would now require the use of, I don't want to bore you with the dark fiber or the lit fiber, I'll simply say the EcoWire. Now, if you bring the traffic up to the Gambia, you have that there. Remember, the PURA guy says we are not using more than 30% of the capacity we have at the GSC. What if we are using currently 70% of that capacity? Chances are the cost of the service we are currently getting, that cost, it can actually go down by more than 50%. Why are we not using 70% of the capacity when instead we are using only 30%? That question may be possibly addressed by tomorrow, but I'll simply say to you, we only bring these vehicles all the way to the Gambia, assuming that it is a big road network. From the Gambia to France and other countries, it's a 5-star road network, maybe 6 lanes on both sides. But when you get to the Gambia, you now have a narrow road, which is the ECO1 backbone, which is the national backbone. This ECO1 is not that narrow, please. Remember, it has a very good capacity. It is really a well-built network. The problem with the ECO1 is how do we access, how do the operators that are having this capacity on the S cable, how do they access the ECO1 network to be able to travel through the ECO1 network and give you the services? there are challenges in that connectivity. The management of the ECO1, we've been saying, we may need to revisit that. The access time to the ECO1, we are saying, we may need to revisit that. Who is currently managing the ECO1 is Gambia, by the way. So there are some key issues in that. And I think it's important that we take note of that. Possibly tomorrow we will be able to address it. I'm simply saying, if we employ that, is going to do something far better. And remember, the GSE is actually based on an open access regime, where we don't want to treat, we want to treat almost every member of the GSE and other parties, other non-GSE parties, with a degree of transparency and non-discrimination. But of course, in as much as you want to do that, you will also understand that there are some other very fundamental challenges we need to address. If you want to address the issue of access and then the issue of cost, I assume that we all understand the time access, meaning you get your connectivity anytime, anyhow, anywhere in this country or outside this country, so long as you are using a network that is based in the Gambia. That is access. But why are people having problems? You want to have access to what? To the data. You want to have access to what? To the infrastructure. You want to have access to what? To the technologies themselves. You want to have access to what? To the use of the applications themselves, as well as the software. Basically, that is it. Especially with this new media we are now having. Integration is so high. Almost we want to do everything with our small little telephones. Be it data, video, on demand, almost everything. But then there is access. You must have access to be able to enjoy those things. We are now saying, I'll just simply say 3 or 4 key issues in summary form to say that's what we need to address in this country. The first one is the licensing framework. Remember, 20 years ago, if a Gambia, you'll be surprised, was never given a license to say provide this. How it all started, we all know. But maybe with the coming of PURA, that is the regulator, when the act legislation was passed, and you have the IC legislation. Remember, the PURA Act came in 2003. After almost 7 years or so, or 4 years or so, the ICT legislation came. And when that happened by 2009, PURA then, using the PURA legislation, was to provide licenses, to give out licenses. But those licenses were hard. You would hear the word is a GSM operator. You would hear the word is a fixed line service provider. Gamtel provides fixed line services. QCell provides GSM services. And again, we say it has to be technology neutral regulatory arrangement or licensing. Our issue here is we are saying if we change the licensing framework, that will also impact on access and cost. How and why? If you license them based on the technology they are using, each of them, QCell would only be providing the GSM services, but they will also provide the network for you. They will also provide the service itself for you. The technology they are using for the service and the infrastructure for the same service. What has changed is that in many jurisdictions, they have adopted what you call the converged licensing framework. In this licensing framework, the converged form, you have only 3 or 4 license categories. You have infrastructure, you have service, you have applications. In some cases, we can say content as well, as far as digital broadcasting is concerned. Now, we have been saying and we think it is high time. We know PURA is making efforts, the ministry is also making efforts to make sure that we have this converged licensing. What is so particularly important in this is this. If you are an infrastructure service provider like Gamtel, you only provide infrastructure. If you want to provide the services, others will now be given a service license. So your focus would be only on infrastructure rollout and the maintenance of that infrastructure. But all the players are saying, build your own infrastructure, provide the service on that infrastructure. That has changed in the world. Because of the duplicity of networks in this country, because of the duplicity of even services on those respective networks, where you don't have some very intelligent arrangement, cost will always be high and access challenges will always be there. So we are saying licensing framework is number one we need to address by adopting a converged licensing regime in this country. The broadcasting side has already started it. We think on the other side of it, we need to start it. If we don't, technology will swallow us. In the interest of time, I can't talk much on that area, possibly by tomorrow. The other one is infrastructure sharing and the rollout. The practice is that when you are building your infrastructure, before they come to build their infrastructure, remember these are businessmen. They are business entities. When they put in the money, they want return on investment. They have used so many models to say, how do I recoup my investment? Why do you have to put up a tower next to a Gamtel tower? Why do you have to really come up with a microwave link when there is already an EcoWan network in this country where you can get connected to fiber and provide your service? These are things we need to address seriously as a country. If we don't, access will be a challenge and cost will still be high. The national backbone, as I said, if you place the national backbone's management in the hands of Gamtel, remember, this is an infrastructure where you have fiber rings, almost 4 or 3 rings covering the entire country. It's a domestic network. Gamtel is using it for its services. You want Qcell and AfriCell and others to use the same network for their services. They have to access that backbone, that EcoWan, just like Gamtel is using it. Remember, one thing is here, there's a difference. If I'm using it as Gamtel and I want to compete you, and yet when I get you connected to this network, you pay me a cost. How competitive would that be? Especially where there is no serious or clear memorandum of understanding between Gamtel and maybe those who have given Gamtel the network, the EcoWan to manage. I think we need to address that very carefully. Because if I am now competing with her, and then she has to really be connected on my network for her to provide her own services, can she really be competing me? In real terms, these are issues we need to look at very critically. But with all that, those who are even connected to EcoWan, sadly or interestingly, they are doing better than that. What is it? So I think we need to look at that. The fourth one is the business models. You know, you have a regulator. Frankly, I think they are doing their job, but we may need to really push up more harder. Review and revise. Look at these business models that we are having for operations. It's a small country. Every operator comes in, invests. At the end of every GB year, what do they reinvest back into that network and service? Is the money being taken away just like that? What is happening? What are the investment commitments in the licenses given to them? Then you look at those commitments and make sure that you reduce the cost. I heard about cost of access, but the cost of that access, as well as the general cost of ICTs. Those business models need to be looked at. And lastly, is the universal access. Remember, I think this is one of the most important areas. Now, to answer the question of access to the provinces, I'm now talking universal access. Remember, the EcoWan that is built, it is not covering all parts of this country. There are gaps. If you go from Touray in Lamin all the way to Lamin and Dankunku, from the highway going in, the EcoWan actually doesn't cover those areas. If you go to Baribu from Jabakunda going all the way into Serign, the EcoWan actually doesn't cover those areas. Those are it's very important gaps and very important settlements are there. They need to be covered. Now, if you come to even our own access to ICTs, believe me, from the first government, the second government, to today's government, ask all those members of parliament and the ministers, put them in this particular hole and try to assess their capacity to use ICTs. You'll be surprised that hardly 50% pass that test. So I think we need to look at that capacity issue, even at our citizens' level. Why am I saying all this? In other countries, what have they done? They have actually come up with what they call the Universal Access Fund. This fund is what? Whose fund is it? And for what? They create a fund whereby each operator in that given country would actually pay a certain amount of their gross revenue, 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever, into a fund. And then that fund in millions now would be identified for what purposes? For addressing those access challenges and cost issues of ICT. One of them would be addressing typically the gaps, especially for rural areas. I think that is very important. The law already has it as a provision that we need the hereby established universal access fund. What must we do now? Is for the government and the regulator to actually take started and initiate. It should have happened years ago. But of course, we understand the considerations that they have given or have been given to say why they are delayed in doing it. But I'm saying nobody can actually say for sure how much each operator is actually receiving for every given month or year as far as their operation is concerned. It's another area that we could possibly talk about tomorrow. Now, to answer a specific question on the shutdowns. Of all the 3 or 4 shutdowns that happened in this country this year, it's unfortunate. I will tell you that mainly two of them are caused at the level of the GSC submarine cable, that is the ACE cable. We had in one case a sun fault, and we had in another case a physical cut of the cable at the sea, which is almost very close to 50 kilometers from the coast here inside the sea. The sun fault is where, when these fishing vessels are running, let's say they are moving from one part, northern Gambia to southern Gambia, or from northern Senegal to southern Senegal, let me be precise in that sense. When these vessels are moving, they go with these big trawling vessels. They are quite big, and then they find it very difficult to actually stop fishing or make sure that their fishing tools are removed from the territorial waters in the Gambia because it's a short distance of barely an hour or two. So when they are moving, they will come across the cable and pull it. Where the rocky part is, because part of the rocky, because it's a rocky part of the cable is not buried. As such, that movement, the current and the vessel's movement of the cable will start having bruises aside. Then the power that is pumped into the cable, that power will lose out. Call it in layman's language, will evaporate partly. And then the signals become weaker, and then we call it a sunfall. Meaning that if you pump it slightly more power, you can get back that power. You can get back the connectivity. For the cut, physical disconnection happens. We have seen that, and for any time we go for that repair work, we actually would pay. The first payment would be $100,000 for us to pay the vessel to go to the sea to start the work. Other charges will come after us. That is the reason for the two sunfalls. Now, the others are not at our level. Remember, one of them happened in around Yundum or Farato, when one entity was actually digging a certain area by the airport and then cut themselves fiber. In most cases, this is what happens. So when that happens, there was a problem. But then the problem is if we have, I think the answer is if we have an infrastructure master plan. When somebody is digging something, you know this area, there is a fiber cable laid in this country. You won't touch it. If you are doing it, you communicate. Because this can be very costly, can be very expensive. The entire country went down for hours and for days in some cases. The third issue is Senegal. I have to be frank, it happened at Senegal because when the edge goes down any time, we now take our traffic back on the terrestrial link, that is the fiber cable connecting the Gambia and Senegal, on the land, the terrestrial side. Now, when that happened in Senegal, there was a problem at Senegal when edge was already having a problem. So obviously, the entire country went down. That's why we are now saying, what plans do we have in place? There are plans for looking at the possibility of having a second submarine cable for the country. There are plans to look at even the possibility of looking up to the satellite service provider so that we don't heavily rely on our very close neighbor, that is Senegal. Your communication is your communication. No amount of fencing, no amount of closeness should make you rely on the trust you have for any other party
an outside party for them to provide other communication services. Today, communication is key. It's our economy, it's our national security, and it must be guided and guided without any compromise. I think that's where the challenge is, and I think the authorities are trying very well. I was there at the level of PURA. In fact, I am maybe, let me say, secretary to that particular committee that is looking at what can we do for the country in order to address these issues. Thank you very much, Madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jabbi. Now I see why Mr. Nicholas wants you to speak for more than 10 minutes. Thank you for that. I think you are needed here because you actually answered a lot of questions people have here. So we'll just take few questions, maximum 2, then we move on to the next section because the other panelists for the next session are waiting. So just 2 questions, and then we move on quickly. Basiru. We already have, I have 2 hands in front of me and they always sit together. Basiru.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jabbi. Because of time, I'll just limit my question to 1. Are there any consequences to those who are usually in conflicts, especially these vessels, when they do the damage at sea level? Are there any legal consequences that we can take up to make sure we do that, considering the cost involved?
Yes, Jabbi, my question is subsea construction. So I've observed that when it comes to repair, you will depend on expertise and vessels that are far somewhere. And in most of the cases, as you stated, that is very expensive, $100,000 or so to bring them on board and fix that particular issue. Do you think it would have been better if in the sub-region, particularly to have our own vessel with our own capacity to take the responsibility of repair and maintenance? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the questions. I think let me start with yes, we have when these cuts happen, we look at what is happening currently, what is available as a framework for enforcement framework. We have engaged the ministry responsible for fisheries and water resources. Remember, they also give licenses to some of these vessels. But in most cases, we realize that a good number of these vessels that are plying our sea for fishing activities, a good number of them actually do not reach those areas. And you will see that who are then those that reach those areas of the sea? Very big vessels, and in most cases, they are either licensed both in the Gambia and Senegal, or they are in fact only licensed in Senegal, or they are illegal fishing vessels that come. Now, if they are illegal, to address that illegal part of it, we have now started doing something with the Gambian Navy. In fact, I would say GSC paid a lot of money, in some thousands of dollars to the Navy, to make sure that, for the government to the Navy, to make sure that we can facilitate them go to the sea to be able to address this illegal fishing. There are engagements also on the ground for government of Gambia and Senegal to actually talk about those that are licensed and those that actually apply in those areas of the sea. So we are looking at those measures to preventive measures. I would also say the third one is at the level of ACE, because of Gambia's own very peculiar experience, we had convinced ACE to come up with an AI system, artificial intelligence for monitoring system. And this also in some good millions of dollars that ACE is putting in there, where from our offices, from the Gambia and anywhere else, you'll be able to see what is happening within our territorial waters and then address it or send us alarms. Also, the government of the Gambia decided to declare what you call a protective zone. And this protective zone is 500 meters on both sides of the cable where the cable is laid to make sure that no fishing activity happens there. So many things are happening at the moment to address that. Now, to come to the question of, I think this question, the last question is quite interesting. Whether we can actually have our own fish repair vessels to do it. Let me put it this way. The vessels alone that they are bringing into this country to be able to monitor the activities at the sea by the Navy. My understanding is this, I stand to be corrected, please take that, but my understanding, my firm understanding is that each vessel may cost almost about $9 million US. And those are just to go around and then see. But in these particular vessels that are built for repair works, two of them may actually cost your national budget. It may be far more. And so we will be looking at rather looking at some. In fact, they may be far more than the value we have put into it as a member of the ACE consortium. But I think right now what is important is Gambia needs a second and third or fourth submarine connectivities to the outside world. We have to be part of those systems. We can build one to Cape Verde. We can also connect with others. Facebook is there, Google is there, main one, so many others. Many other small nations have done that. Why can't we do it? And nobody should tell us about cost. In ICT, cost is just relative. Maybe $100 million. What do you get within 5 years for that? And we can play the ICT anywhere. Gambia is not small. Once you are connected to the outside world, you have the global market. And that's where we have to play the game. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jabbi. That will be the end of this session, and the next session will be on building a digital economy, the Gambia and the NDP. It's supposed to be chaired by Beran Gillen. Beran is joining us online, and she cannot be here. So I don't know whether she's online right now. If she's not online, we can have Pons to moderate the session for